You've lost the Necropolis War against Mega City 1, and you feel that a little PR work might help people see your side. If people only knew the real you, they wouldn't be so quick to call the side division. So load your lawgiver and remember that the sentence for life is death as we read Judge Dredd, Boyhood of a Superfiend on It's a Kind of Garbage Comic Edition.
It's a kind of
So, Adam, this is a book I've known about for a while, and it was actually very hard for me to find a physical copy of it up until a few years ago. And when we were discussing books to recommend for each other to read, I was pretty excited to get you to read this book. What did you think?
I believe this is my first Judge Dredd book I've actually read, or even like, let's say, 2000 AD universe. This is my very first book, and I think it was a good intro for me. And yeah, like I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, so I jumped into Judge. It's kind of hard because Judge Dredd has never had any, as far as 2000 AD goes, it's never had any retcons or it's never had any like soft relaunches. So any Dredd book you're reading, you can really at any point in the story they can reference something, and there might be a little editor's note or there might be something to kind of give you a little bit of reference as to what they're talking about, but they can go back and talk about anything in the comics. Almost, what is it, almost 50 years old now? Like they can go back 50 years now and be like, oh, this is something from this long ago, which is pretty wild to think about. That is a big part, but it is fun when they take some of these wild ideas from the comics, from like obviously the big like heyday of comics from the 80s and the 90s, when they take some of these characters that they've created and they go, this character really doesn't work now. And in most comics, they would say, let's just not bring this character back up ever again. Or why don't we try to relaunch this character but make them grounded so they fit the universe better? In 2000 AD, they'll just say, nope, there's a demon ghost judge who hates Judge Dredd, who's always hanging around the city, giving Judge Dredd a hard time, which I absolutely love.
For anybody who doesn't know, Judge Death is a judge from an alternate universe, or is it universe or planet?
It's hard to say. It's like another dimension. Yeah, it's like another universe. Yeah, so Judge Death is the head of four other judges. No, three other judges. There's four in total that call themselves the Dark Judges, who are from another world where they've realized that the common denominator of crime is that only the living commit crime. So to solve crime, they have to sentence anyone who's alive to die. So they kill off their entire world, and then they decide to travel to the 2000 AD Mega City 1 world, and they try to continue their war against crime there.
Yeah, this book it's an autobiography as told by Judge Death on how he became to be. It's kind of the Wolverine origins of the 20,000 AD universe.
Yeah, that's one of the things I really love about this is it's a shameless ripoff of the Anne Rice book, and it had a movie too, Interview with the Vampire, where a reporter answers a call for like a story, like an unbelievable scoop on a story. So when he answers the call, he kind of realizes the person who's interviewing him and telling him this wild story might not be as wild as it sounds. Like it might be a real story, which I kind of think is a neat narrative mechanism to like explain a supervillain's story, is just have them sit down and be like, you know what, I'm not the bad guy here. You guys just need to hear me.
He explains like his thought process, all that when they called them judges, but they had a different name for them, didn't they?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what they were, but here, give me one sec. I have the book right in front of me. It's kind of a parallel version of the judge system in Mega City 1, where the police are like the ultimate authority figures in this world, and he is one of them. It might be judges. Yeah, it's judges.
In his version, he just like these judges from Mega City 1, they are judge, jury, and executioner. He decides, like you were saying, that everyone is guilty, but he just couldn't figure out, like, originally he's just like, yeah, they're all guilty. It's like, oh, but these people, like, they changed their mind. It's like, yeah, but they were guilty of wasting my time. So it's almost like the Judge Death. He starts out by like, he's evil incarnate. He just wants to kill everybody. And then eventually it's almost like he needs an excuse to kill everyone. So that's when he just figures out, you know what, everyone who's living has sinned, basically. So everyone's guilty, and the punishment should always be death. There is no other punishment but death. Yeah, it's all the living. And then we'll get into it, but then that's why when he becomes like actual death, then he gets like his henchmen guys to become death with
Mhm.
him. Yeah, so they're no longer living. But I'm jumping way
Yeah,
ahead.
it's so just to get into the actual character right now of Judge Death, he very much has like parallels to Judge Dredd in his appearance, where they both wear like the policeman's uniform, but where Judge Dredd has like his motorcycle helmet on, and he has like these big, like super patriotic pauldrons on his shoulders. Like one of them is of an, like on Judge Dredd, it's of like it's like an eagle, and it's supposed to like represent the Hall of Justice and the whole system of the judges. Where Judge Death, he has like a giant bat wing, and then his helmet, he's like, I love the design of the character. Instead of wearing like the judge's motorcycle helmet, he wears a slightly different version where instead of it being a visor, it's like cemetery gates or fences that he's always peeking through. I absolutely love it. If you want to, I don't, I lost my mind a couple of years ago when they came out with that. What was that Batman event? Or it was a DC event.
Oh yeah, it was like death metal or Batman
Yes,
metal.
and there's a Batman called the Batman Who Laughs, who's like a twisted alternate version of Batman. And anytime I see that character, I'm like, I don't know. I never read DC's Death. What was it called? Death Metal, Dead Metal, Dark Metal.
Uh, I feel like it's Batman
Was it just
metal.
called Batman Metal?
To be fair, nobody reads DC. It's a bold
Yeah.
claim, but I'm sticking to
Well,
it.
it was when I saw the character for like some of the promos for upcoming books and events for DC. That's the first thing I thought of was, oh, they made a Judge Death character.
Oh, it looks exactly. It's the mouth. It's the fact that the mouth is the exact same, and the face, like his eyes are obscured almost in the same way. But then he has. If you gave Judge Death like Batman pointy ears at the
Hmm.
top, that's literally all that he's missing to be almost a carbon like copy
Well,
from what Batman copied
yeah,
off of
so
them.
he's got a, they both have a cowl on that like obscures their face from the mouth up. So all that's visible is their mouth. And they have this huge grin, like this big toothy grin. And I know with the Batman one, it's obviously a play on it being like, is it what if the Joker was the Batman? I think that's what they were going for. I haven't read it yet. They're both like a tall, thin version of Batman, and they both have like this big shoulder pad thing going. I don't know. They look, and they both have long fingers with claw-like fingernails, very Nosferatu, Dracula looking, and it's, I don't know. Anyways, so that's the design of Judge Death. And as for the character himself, he has so many parallels with the Judge Dredd character, where Judge Dredd, like even if you had to commit a crime to save yourself, or even if you committed a crime only by it, like via technicality, Judge Dredd is always like that super by the book cop who's like I remember there's a Judge Dredd story where a guy jumps off a building to commit suicide, and then Judge Dredd, as he's like about to jump, Judge Dredd is just like, get ready to arrest that guy for littering because his body's gonna like litter the sidewalk. And it's like, and it's funny, like it's obviously like a very like, dark parody and everything, but Judge Death is the exact same. Like if it shows him when he is a judge and he's just sentencing people to death for everything. Like Oh, jaywalking, death sentence. Loitering, death sentence. So we'll get that's kind of the background of the character, and then the story for the book is this book takes place sometime after I think it was an early 2000s 2000 AD of kind of event involving Judge Dredd and the Mega City 1 universe where the dark judges had returned to try to kill everyone in the city to like purge the city of crime. And obviously Judge Dredd and the Justice Department prevails and they stop the dark judges. This book is kind of used as like a setup of, well, what happened to Judge Death in between that appearance and his latest appearance. And the story is that Judge Death's body was pushed into a mass grave with a bunch of other Mega City 1 residents who had died. Because he can never truly die, he just kind of sits there and reflects on what went wrong until grave robbers dig him up by accident. And he decides to go back into Mega City 1 and reevaluate his plan. And the plan that he comes up with is, what if I were to have a reporter interview me and write down my story, like my life story, so people will understand I'm not the bad guy. Like, I'm trying to stop crime. I'm a good guy. And as soon as that happens, the rest of the book is told through flashbacks of him explaining his childhood. As we cut to, originally it's Judge Hershey, and then it's Judge Dredd and Anderson kind of piecing together that Death is back in the city and they have to trail him down.
When we start out the story with Judge Hershey, they pull just like, I guess, a skin man, a guy who's missing all of his skin. Was he dumped in acid?
Yeah.
Was that what happened? So they, and you don't know, but we'll get into it afterwards. That is the spoilers. It's the interviewer, which you kind of find out if this was released in Judge Dredd magazine. I think it was like 1.0 to 1.12.
Yep.
I think. Yeah, I'm just trying to remember from the cover page. But I would say at the end of the first issue is probably where you start to realize, oh, that's the interviewer. Like, he's the one that's been killed. So you know what's going to happen in the end. Because even in Interview with the Vampire, didn't he kill the person interviewing him at the end?
Not him, but yeah, another vampire. So in Interview with the Vampire, he's interviewing Brad Pitt and he's talking about his life being a vampire and like basically his run-ins with another group of vampires that also included Tom Cruise. And then as the reporter goes to leave, I think he's jumped by Tom Cruise to be like, surprise, Tom Cruise is still alive too. Again, a movie I haven't seen or thought of in like 20 years. So
yeah, I have it on DVD somewhere. I've even after actually it'd probably be in my basement, my storage locker. But yeah, I definitely have Interview with the Vampire on DVD.
I looked it up. This story was originally released in Judge Dredd magazine, which I believe was a comic spin-off from 2000 AD. So normally 2000 AD is a magazine that launches monthly and has the magazine is usually split up into 4 different stories, and these stories they're not always ongoing. So sometimes they'll be they'll always involve any of the 2000 AD characters that they have. I think there's always a Judge Dredd story in it, but some of the other stories have been like Devlin Waugh is one, and Strontium Dog. What's the other one? ABC Warriors. Like, there's a bunch of characters that this is how 2008, like, it would be like buying a Marvel magazine, and instead of it being a full Spider-Man comic, a quarter of the magazine would be part of a Spider-Man story, a quarter would be an Avengers story, a quarter would be an X-Men story, and then another quarter would be a Fantastic Four story.
Yeah, the only other 20,000 AD character that I know is Rogue Trooper.
Yeah, 2000 AD. You're thinking 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea.
Was Sean Connery in that?
God. This book, I think, got released it was called Judge Dredd magazine, which I think was just kind of like a traditional North American formatted comic book. So you can definitely pick up reading the trade. You can definitely pick up like where the story breaks are, like where the twist and the cliffhangers end off. But if you were to read, if anyone reads Judge Dredd in a 2000 AD magazine, it definitely takes some getting used to because the books come out more frequently, but you're reading a much shorter section of the story at a time. Like it might
Yeah,
only be 4 pages.
I feel bad saying this. While I was reading it, Judge Death's artwork looks amazing. Everybody else kind of looks like that person who just hasn't quite nailed their art style yet. And it looks like it probably is, but it looks like pencil crayons.
Yeah, I think I'm trying to think. I think it's watercolors.
Yeah, with that said, like I cannot draw nearly this good, but yeah, something that it was really weird. Like some of them looked very like primitive heavy metal
Yeah.
style. Like it's there, but it's missing something. But then you get to, like to the full page spread of Judge Death, and he looks great. He looks amazing. And then you start going to the interviewer, Mr. Fuck, what's his name?
Oh, Rickard. It's Brian Record or Rickard.
Brian
Oh,
Scutter,
yes, that's it, Scudder.
Skutter. Yeah, so Scudder, like even there, I'm like, he looks okay. Death always looks great. Yeah, the artwork took a little bit of getting used to because this is from I think it was 89, 90.
You know what? I'm trying to remember. I think it came out in 2008 originally. Nope, 1990.
Well,
Sorry. The copy that I bought is a trade that was recollected in 2008. The original published date was 1990. You're right.
it's pre like image. It's like that high extreme style. So this is extreme before extreme. This doesn't have that refinement of even like Ravage that we are used to. It still looks amazing. It's very, I guess,
Yeah,
British.
so it definitely like well, you nailed the nail on the head. It's a very European, it's very heavy metal European comic. Like it's very soft painted, which definitely takes some getting used to. I love it, even though you're right. Like some of it's not hard pencils and inks like a lot of 90s American comics. It definitely does take some getting used to, and you're right. There are a few parts that kind of get muddled and muted. But when you look at like the Judge Death character and some of the other stuff, like where it's good, it's great.
While we're jumping into the plot, we mentioned the pit that Judge Death was buried in with the
Hmm.
mass grave, and this is pit number 12. And there's some writing on like I guess the headstone that says, "Here lie millions who perished during the dark days of Necropolis. May they find eternal peace."
Yeah, it's literally a mass grave.
And it's just grave robbers like pulling jewelry off of dead bodies, and then that's where they see what Judge Death's his like badge, and then he just kills them right
Hmm.
away.
So in the 2000 AD universe, the world is basically like everything's almost a bit of a wasteland, and scattered around the world are these enormous cities called mega cities. Everyone is kind of shoved into this like super city. So it's just people living in, you know, 300-story tall skyscrapers, and it's like cities the size of like states, and they have hundreds of millions of people living in them. And then later on, they introduce that there's Mega City One, and then there's Mega City Two, and then there's a city in Japan, and there's a city in Russia as well. And eventually, they all go to war with one. Like, there's lots of great stories involving it. I think this book takes place after I think it's the first or second appearance of Judge Death, where when he shows up, they literally go on a rampage and kill, it's like tens of millions of people in Mega City 1 before they're stopped. But getting back into the actual story of the book, it opens up with he's a young boy named Sydney who's torturing his family dog, and his sister calls him out on it and is like, I'm going to go tell mom you're torturing the dog. And he gets so mad. He thinks the dog is bad because he got in trouble, and then he kind of vows to get revenge on his sister as well. So he trains his dog to play catch, and then he just throws the ball off a cliff.
The best thing about young Sydney is he looks like a flesh-toned, like he's a white boy, but he looks like a flesh-toned young version of Jim Carrey's The Grinch. That's his
Yeah, he just
face.
has like this like upturned nose. He just looks like a little shit. Like he just looks like the shittiest kid, and it's just awesome that and that's something else I love too is instead of this book trying to say like because sometimes I find now where they try to make villains sympathetic or they try to say like like they'll try to do like Magneto or Doctor Doom where they're like, well, he's not really a villain. Like he doesn't believe he's a villain. He just has different motives than the main character. There's that. And then also there's you can do a character like Batman and the Joker, where the Joker is just an insane person, where nothing he does has any reason or makes sense. But Judge Death kind of hits this perfect middle ground where he thinks he's doing a good job and he thinks he's justified in what he's doing, but he's also insane.
I like to think that he knows that he's like he knows that he's right, but he also knows what he's doing is just like I'm just murdering people. And I like to think that he's aware that he just likes to kill people, so he needed to find a reason to kill people. Like he must know that he's broken.
Yeah, that's maybe. I don't it is hard because again, he's introduced in the comic as this like very ghostly kind of phantom figure where they shoot at him with guns and the guns don't work and they don't know how to kill him and they have to figure something out. So he's not quite human, but then when you go back to his origin story starts with him being like a little boy. Like he even when he starts his own origin story, he doesn't say like I'm a ghost from this dimension. He's like, no, I was a little boy with a dog and a sister who I hated.
Even with his sister, after he get trains his dog to jump off a cliff, he throws what looks to be an octopus, some type of octopus creature on his sister's face, which stings her and basically just gives her like it
Yeah,
cripples her, and she's in pain for the rest of her life. It's
yeah. So
amazing.
he kills his dog and paralyzes his sister, and then he says this event when he was younger taught him people won't understand that because he thinks he's doing the right thing. Like he thinks the dog is a bad dog, so he has to kill it. And he thinks his sister is a bad sister because she tells on him, so she has to go as well. In his thought process, he's like, okay, I'll kill them both. And then when he gets caught, he gets in trouble. And then he goes, oh, people don't understand. Like people don't get why I'm doing this, so I can't let on this is like my thought process to how to resolve issues. So the sister's sent away. He's being raised by his mom and dad. This is my favorite part of the book is when he's sent to his mom says that the dad has to spend more time with him. And then when he's explaining his dad, he's like, my dad was one of the most vicious, sinister, sadistic, like monsters that was allowed to roam the streets. And the reporter's like, oh, was your dad like a murderer? And he goes, no, my dad was a dentist. Which is a
He was
British comic. That's amazing. Like, that's such a good joke.
I love that his dad had a mobile dentist van where he would just like drive place to
Yeah, so
place.
his dad has like an ice cream truck that's just like, hey, I'm a traveling dentist, so you can come and get dental work done. And the dad is just, as soon as the dad knocks people out to like pull cavities or do whatever, he just tortures them. Like the dad just hates people. And it gives a lot of insight later on for how Judge Death's thought process is that the reason there's crime is because there's people alive committing crime. When he talks to his dad, and his dad is like, I absolutely hate cavities, but the reason why there is cavities is because people have teeth. So the solution is I just rip all the teeth out of people's mouths. And then it just shows the dad, like the dad's like, you said one of your teeth was hurting you as he's working on a patient. And then he just goes, well, they're all going to hurt you eventually. And then the dad just starts hammering out all of this guy's teeth. So we go on for a little bit, just kind of getting some insight as to how Sydney's, which is Judge Death, how his insane father is kind of starting to influence him. And then the dad ends up kind of sharing like a bit of a father-son moment with him where he just imparts, he's like, never forget, Sydney, everyone has worms on their brain, and that's why people do the weird things they do. And everyone has it. Like, no one is without worms. Your mom has them, your sister has them, I have them. Like, it's just something, it's an awful thing humans have to deal with. Judge Death, sorry, later takes this as the dad was like giving him some metaphor as to worms mean all humans are with sin and no one is truly innocent. Everyone is guilty.
The great thing too is that the interviewer like backhandedly like makes fun of Judge Death sometimes, or just says shit to him where Death is like, hey, like, shut the fuck up or I'm gonna kill you. I don't have to take it from you.
Yeah, so the whole Judge Death at the start of the interview when he's being interviewed, he's like, why would I interview you? Like, you're just gonna kill me. And he's like, why? He's like, why would I kill you? I'm too tired to kill anyone. I just killed 50 million people and I want my story told. So how does it make any sense that I would kill you? And the guy goes, all right, well, you got a good point there. And then Judge Death goes, I couldn't even kill a fly right now. And then within like 5 pages, Judge Death admits to like 5 murders since he got back into Mega City 1. And the interviewer goes, well, what about those people? And he goes, hey, they weren't flies. He's like, hey, technically I didn't lie. Like, I said I wouldn't kill a fly.
So there is an argument that Judge Death's dad, or Sydney's dad at this point, is worse than him. Well, he doesn't kill people, he just makes them feel
I think
immense pain.
Later on
where
it is shown where I think it's supposed to be implied that the dad is just flat out killing people and dumping them off a cliff.
Yeah, they go like to the Alps where he is just like hucking them out of his truck. So maybe his dad just upgrades over time instead of ripping people's teeth out. Even the reporter asked, like, how come nobody reports your dad? And then he said, oh, they're all afraid of him. So people would go there, like, stumble out with their faces bleeding, teeth missing, like in a daze, and then he'd be like, next.
Yeah,
and
he just got away with it. People were too scared. And I think the dad upgrades to murder because Sydney is sent to go to work with his dad. Like, I think Sydney starts, as much of an influence his dad has on him, Sydney also starts to have that influence on his dad, being like, hey, Dad, like, all this secret stuff you're telling me, you're right. Like, you're totally justified in what you're doing. And the dad's like, yeah, like, I shouldn't be pulling their teeth out. Like, if this guy's too stupid to brush his teeth, I should just kill him.
And how does his dad get caught?
Sydney turns him in.
Yeah. As his dad's being arrested, it's one of my favorite parts. The judge just looks at him and is like, great job, kid. And then the kid's like, thanks. And then the kid looks over at a poster, like a recruitment poster, and the judge says, are you interested? And he's like, I think I am.
Yeah, so that's kind of also one of the glimpses into the world that Judge Death comes from is referenced in 2000 AD as Dead World. And I it's kind of referenced that way as because Judge Death eventually kills everyone on that world. But he mentions several times throughout this book that Dead World is like, it's kind of a harder, more ruthless version of Earth. Like, life is cheaper on that world. There isn't as much like morality or ethics tied to like murder or anything like that. Like, it's just kind of like, yeah, that guy did wrong, kill him. And that's just the way it is. And that kind of like lets him thrive in that world. So yeah, so Sydney turns his father in. And then when they ask him if he wants like a prize or if he wants some sort of like medal for catching a serial killer, he says he wants to be granted admittance into their version of the Hall of Justice to be a junior judge, and that he also wants to pull the switch on his dad's electric chair. So we then cut to like a 10-year-old boy with his hand on like a comically sized electric chair switch, and he's looking at his dad, and his dad's just like, never forget, Sydney, worms on the brain. And he's like, you got it, dad. And then he kills his dad. So we then cut to Sydney is now in like it's like a cadets program for kids who want to be judges. So Sydney is kind of thriving in this very strict academy, and anyone who's crossing paths with him, he's kind of setting them up to fail. So it references that there was a couple of like incidences at the academy that he kind of is like, I made sure it looked like one of the other students who I didn't like committed the crime. So one of them is there's like a residence where tutors live, and it burns down and kills 4 of them. And it's implied that Sydney did it. And then he plants a bunch of cans of gas in a locker that's owned by one of the other students, and then just points it out and says, hey, has anyone ever looked in that kid's locker? And they open up his locker, and it has all the incriminating evidence to say that he did it. And then they're like, good work, Sydney. Like, you solved the case of the burnt down building. And they're like, what do we do next? And then Sydney goes, well, here's a neat idea. Because we're being trained on how to be judges, wouldn't this be the perfect opportunity to let us chase down and judge a suspect? And their teacher is just like, yeah, it makes sense to me. There's this amazingly like unsettling sequence where it's just a group of like 11-year-olds with like laser guns chasing down this pudgy 11-year-old, and then like they all shoot him at the same time, and the kid just like explodes.
Yeah, that's
Oh
so
yeah.
fucked up. Just reading, I was like, oh, this is like Lord of the Flies, but they're all being trained
Yeah,
how to be police.
exactly. It's a wild book. I was really excited for you to read this because I had seen sequences of this book online, just being like, this is a book, and I was like, I need to get this book eventually, and it was just so hard to find a physical copy, but I did get one eventually. I actually got it at a comic book shop in Hungary. An
Oh, in
English copy.
English?
Yeah, there was only a handful of
Nice.
there was only, I think it was Spider-Man, Batman, and something else were translated into Hungarian. I kind of wish I would have bought a Hungarian comic, but they were really expensive. Comics were ridiculously priced over there. And I was kind of like, I want to buy one. It just kind of seems like something all it's going to do is collect dust. And I went through some of their trades, and I found the actual trade of Boyhood of a Superfiend with the amazing Peter Doherty, who does all the painting. It's got his painted cover, and it's such a good cover. So yeah, seeing some of like these like really sadistic panels, I was just like, this book is wild. I need to track down a copy. So I finally found it, bought it, read it, and I loved it. And I was like so excited to like, because I think I've got a few other people to read this, and they're just kind of like, what the hell? Sydney ends up, so then we end up jumping forward a bit. Now Sydney's like a teenager or a young adult, and he's now like an official junior judge or a trainee judge. And part of his training classes is that he has to sit in court and deliver sentencing. So that's the segment you were talking about where the people want their wedding annulled. And then he's just like, oh, you guys want to get divorced. And then they've seen him kill everyone who comes to trial that day. So they're like, actually, we changed our mind. This is fine. We're going to stay married. And then he's like, hey, that's perfect. That just makes it, I love to see people stay together. I'm glad that the court helped someone resolve their problem, da da da. And then as the people are hugging each other, he just shoots them both in the head. And then he's like, by the way, the sentence for wasting the court's time is death.
Just when you don't think it can get any more insane, he gets called to like let's say like the principal, the head of the school, of the judge trainees. And he's like, hey, Sydney, you're killing everybody. Like even the couple who decide that they didn't want to get divorced. Come on, you have to cut them some slack. Like there were guilty pleas, no, not guilty. You can't be doing that. And then Sydney just fires back, but judge, like, what's the repeat offender like percentage? He's like, oh, what was like 63 or 33% of people commit offenses again. He's like, yeah, but guess what? So Sydney says, but Judge, I'm gonna have 0%
Yeah,
recommitters. Fuck,
the
reoffenders
recommitters.
for the recommitters. I'm gonna have 0% reoffenders. So that's like the best like possible outcome, right? And he's like, well,
Yeah,
I
so this is kind
guess.
of like this is something else I really love about the Judge Death character is when he's explaining his origin, he thinks he's right, but like even in his explanation and his flashbacks, he's a complete like sociopath where he looks at his father and he sees that his father just like hates his job and hates the people who come in with rotten teeth. So he ends up using that to twist and turn his father. And then he does the same with his principal at the academy, where the guy's just like, hey, we're all about numbers and da 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 da. And Judge Death is like, oh, you're all about numbers? Check this out. No one who I sentence today will ever commit a crime again. How can you be mad at me? And the guy's just like, yeah, you got a point. He's like, no one you saw today is ever gonna commit another crime. So then we jump forward a little bit farther. He's now a full-on judge and he's actually started to like convince other judges to start following him. So he kind of it's the same as Judge Dredd. He starts to become like almost like a mythical figure in that community where they're like, hey, that's and they nicknamed him Judge Death. So they're like, hey, that's Judge Death, that guy who's like super, by the book and he's like really hard edge. So I think it's at this point that he uses his resources as a judge to track down his mom and his sister, and then who they've basically been hiding from him, and then he tracks them down and kills them both.
Yeah, his sister confined to a wheelchair, and then his mom is just pushing her. He ends up shooting his
Yeah,
sister right in the face.
yeah. So kills his sister. I think he throws the mom off a cliff. Like it's pretty wild.
Yeah, they're in a castle, and chases his mom right to the top of like a tower. Yeah, and just hucks her off like Darth Vader hucking the Emperor down the
Yes.
fucking hole.
Which is that's act you know what that's actually a pretty interesting parallel I didn't pick up on because he literally you're right like that's kind of funny. He picks his mom and throws her off the edge, and the mom kind of has that falling death scene that normally is resolved for villains. So like normally that death scene would have been how Judge Dredd would have defeated Judge Death. He would have picked him up and thrown him off a cliff, and then as Judge Death is falling, he would have been like, I'll be back. But instead of that, Judge Death throws his mom off a cliff, and the mom's just like, "Why?"
We
Yeah,
gave you
like
nothing but
we tr-
love.
we tried to do you right, and he's just like, "Finally, my arch nemesis, my mother, is defeated." And it's like this guy is nuts.
The only thing that could have made it better is as she was falling, if he did yell, and I did kill the dog.
Oh my god, yeah, because the mom's like, I'm pretty sure he killed the dog. But like as far as like dark humor in this book goes, when the mom's pushing the daughter around like up this like spiral ramp to try to escape him, and he shoots his sister. The mom has to let go of the wheelchair, and then as Judge Death is running up the spiral, you see like the wheelchair with the sister rolls past him. Like as far as like comedic imagery, there's like a lot of really, really dark humor in this book, like like twisted stuff,
Yeah.
which I think's great. But yeah, I like could see a lot of people being like, "What the hell am I reading?" So that's great. So he finally defeats his arch nemesis mother. Then the interviewer says to him, well, by the sound of all this, you're like a 20-year-old, you're like a young man doing all this. Like, how come he calls him a zombie? And then Judge Death takes like huge offense to being called a zombie. And then Judge Death says he ends up tracking down this legend of like a town where kids and people would go missing. And he finds out that there's like these witches that are like the head of a death cult that worship death. And then he's like, I worship death. Like, we're on the same page. And they end up telling him that they can make him perfect, where they can make him dead but not dead. So that way he's the only one innocent of being alive. And because he's the only one innocent, that reserves him the right to judge the rest of the planet. So it goes through this pretty like gruesome montage of he like drinks poison for 30 days and kills his body, and then they prepare his body, and then they like exorcise his soul from his body and then reanimate it so that his soul is then trapped in his like undead body. And that's where we get like the classic Judge Death. Like this is when we get like his actual appearance of him with like the green skin and no and the lips pulled back over yellow teeth and the long claws on his fingers.
Yeah, it's crazy that he gets two witches just to kill him, and it was funny seeing his spirit or his essence kind of shoot out as just like a skull hovering around, be like, "Hey, I'm free," and his three like apostles are just watching.
Yeah,
It's like, "Oh, he
they're
did
like,
it! Look at
hey,
that
good
guy!
for
Look
you,
at him
Sydney.
go!"
He's literally like a disembodied flying spirit. And he's like, yes, I finally ditched my body. And they're like, go, Sydney, you did it.
Once he stands up and he's put on his helmet, he's just like, I'm 100%. And then the other judges just mow him down with bullets, and he just looks down. He's like, it works.
Yeah, which is, I just actually, that scene reminded me, or that panel reminded me of, this is kind of like Judge Death's most famous moment when he first appears in Mega City 1 in his first appearance. Judge Dredd shoots him a bunch of times in the chest, and he's like, bullets do nothing to me. He says something along the lines of like, gaze upon the face of your judgment. And then Judge Dredd, like, the bullets have done nothing to him. So then Judge Dredd just like punches him square in the teeth and says, gaze into the fist of Dredd, which is pretty great. Um, at that point, the book starts to wrap up. He basically says, at this point, I become an undead, and I recruit my lieutenants to become undead soldiers as well. And we judged our entire planet and then realized it was time to move on to another world to like continue our war on crime. And that's how they end up in Mega City 1.
Yeah, the reason why Judge Death, which is the fucking just the exclamation point on this story of Judge Death, is he kills the reporter because they turned his expose, his interview, into a BuzzFeed article for the newspaper. It's like 10 interesting
Yeah,
facts you didn't know
he
about Judge
thinks that
Death.
this is going to be like a very serious thing, but he doesn't, and it's told through Judge Hershey's story where she's like, who is the victim? And they're like, oh, it's this guy who writes like trashy magazine articles. And then she's like, oh, okay. So then Judge Death lets this guy go. He lets the reporter go, being like, yeah, like we're done. Like I go out there and tell the world. And he's like, oh, okay, bye. And then the next day it's posted in like some trash magazine, and it's, yeah, you're right, it's like, hey, did you know Judge Death might be your neighbor, and 10 things you didn't know about Judge Death. And it's like he just loses his mind, and he's like, this is what you turned my life story into, like this is what you got out of the interview.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the quote was like, I give you my
Yeah,
life and you give me
it's
trivia.
it's really great. Yeah.
I would say that if they made a
Yeah.
Judge Dredd Trivial Pursuit game, that every single Judge Death question should be from this
Well,
issue and
this is
nothing
where it gets
more.
funny is obviously it's with both of us being in North America, it's very hard to read Judge Dredd, which already is kind of a hard comic to follow because not a lot of stores get issues of 2000 AD. It's a 50-year-old comic that's still following one continuity, so it's very hard to be like, where's a good jumping in point? There's a collection. I think it's called the Judge Dredd Crime Files. And Crime Files 1 literally starts with 2000 AD issue 7, which is like the first appearance of the Judge Dredd story in the magazine. And it collects everything that's ever, it collects all the Judge Dredd stuff. But again, like, there's no jumping in point other than issue 1. So it's kind of, it's hard. And then, like I said, I couldn't find anywhere in North America anyone who published. I couldn't find anywhere that carried this trade. The copy I have doesn't even have like an American or Canadian price on the back. It's just UK pricing. So yeah, it's super hard to find. But it did start off like this book really got me into the character of Judge Death. I think it's such a hilarious antagonist to have Judge Dredd face. And there have been several other good collections that involve him. So obviously this issue or this book ends with him kind of casually saying, "That's how I became Judge Death, and then we killed our world and then came to your world." And obviously that leaves open, well, wouldn't that be a wild story about Judge Death going to war with his world? And I believe it came out in the 2000s, and I believe it's an ongoing series that's kind of has trades come out every couple of years, and it's called Dark Judges. And 2000 AD has been having like a creative team actually tell the story of I think the first the first book is called Dark Judges, The Fall of Dead World, and it's all about people's stories of what was going on in Dead World when Judge Death decided to like go to war with it.
Nice. Oh my God. I want to say I have to check it out, but there's
I
so
have.
much
I
to
think I have
read.
the first two books of the Dark Judges. If you want, I can lend them to you or tell you what like the actual names are if you want to try to find them. They're fun. Like they're and again, you might be into it. I don't know, but like the art style, it's not Peter Doherty. It's a different art team that does it, but it's painted still. But it is the painting's a little. I would say the art's a bit better in the newer books, but it is very like when you look at it, it's not like a North American looking comic. It very much is like this looks like heavy metal.
I would like to say that I recommend this book to everybody. If you don't know, if you don't know Judge Dredd, like I said, I this is the first Judge Dredd book that I've read, even though he's only in a like let's say 2 pages
Hmm.
max, like of all the panels. I haven't seen the Stallone movie, but I have seen the Dredd movie, which is amazing. But yeah, I
Yeah,
fucking read this book.
I find that it's like I don't know. There seems to be like a huge following now where comic book fans love following villains. Like I know like Marvel has had ongoings for Magneto and Doctor Doom and a bunch of other villains, and then and Thanos had one. And I know that DC they did like a whole year dedicated to like doing books about villains. Every like anytime they come out with like especially DC, it seems like anytime they're like, hey, we're going to do a book or we're going to do some sort of story that focuses on the Joker, everyone seems to like lose their mind over it. So I think if you're a fan of like comics that focus on the antagonist of the story, this kind of hits all the high points of like fun things to do with that. Like you have an unreliable narrator who's kind of like selling you his side of a very evil story. It's like very sadistic where it has kind of the best of both where like it's nurture versus nature where like you know the world made him but he also kind of helped like he was also kind of raised that way by his parents. It's a fun book for sure.
It is time for
Mm-hmm.
our sacred rankings. So I'll jump in first. This one, I enjoyed it a lot. Even though some of the artwork didn't catch me right away, I found myself being lost and especially into the story,
Mm-hmm.
and the art grew on me over time. I'm going to put this as number three. That is right under Hard Boiled and right above
Nice.
X Women.
So for my ranking, I would put this is my new number four. I'm gonna put it right below Half Century War and right above that Milo X Women book that you showed me, which I loved. This is like one of my favorite comics that like when I picked it up, I was so pumped to find a copy of it. And I love anyone who kind of has like any interest in Judge Death or Judge Dredd or anything. I always love kind of pointing them in the direction of this book to be like, this is a pretty wild story that if you're looking for something different, this like, you might really be into this.
Awesome. So for our next episode, I don't think we have exactly what we're going to be doing next. With today's episode, also dropped a Patreon episode that we haven't recorded as of right now, but will be out today as well. And that, my friends, is a VHS tape. We don't have the actual tape, we're going to have a rip of it, but it's going to be the 1986 classic erotic film
What is that?
Daydreams.
Oh
Cody had
no.
a sneak peek of it, which involved that's what we're going to be doing next. Cody has a sneak peek of it. I'm not going to get into details, but let's just say there is a lady washing her boat off, and she is topless, and it might be sponsored by a beer company. Not 100% sure, but I'm looking forward to
Yeah,
watching the whole
you
23
kind of explained this
minutes.
to me, and I'm excited. I almost don't want to do any research on it. I think this might be a fun episode just because it's going to be us cutting into this. I don't like because you showed me a couple clips of it. I don't know if it's like a movie or a marketing campaign or like a sales pitch. I won't talk about it anymore until the actual episode, but I have a pretty good idea that I want to pitch to you of what I think it is, but we'll talk about it on the next episode.
All right, we hope that you enjoyed listening to us today talk about the judge. And if you're not a Patreon subscriber and you want to hear us talk about Daydreams, good luck finding it online because it's so fucking
Yeah,
obscure that it's
I don't think
insane.
anyone, yeah, it's going to be wild. All right, thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.
As always, you can find us online through our social media accounts on Twitter and Instagram, both at A Kind of Garbage. You can also email us at akindofgarbage@gmail.com with any questions or comments you may have. Be sure to check us out at akindofgarbage.com, where you can find links to our Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube pages, as well as our Patreon page at patreon.com/akindofgarbage, where you can get access to our private Discord channel and Patreon exclusive podcasts. Thank you again for joining us, and be sure to tune in next time.
So we're getting into that holiday season, and for whatever reason, Walmart in Canada has been stocking eggnog since October. I don't know if you've
I
seen it on
work
the
with a
shelf,
guy
Cody.
who I haven't worked with him for too long. He's kind of like newer in my department, but he's works at the same place I do. Where I've heard legendary stories of like this guy. I don't know if he freezes eggnog or if he found a place that makes eggnog like year round, but they've like apparently they've witnessed this guy like drinking eggnog like in the spring, and they're just like, what are you drinking? And he's like, eggnog. And they're like, what? Like it's April, where did you get eggnog? And he's like, I have my sources.
So I can I have a story before my story about that as well. Loblaws in Canada, or I guess the real Canadian Superstore, or whatever you want to call it, they had PC President's Choice brand eggnog there, but it was you didn't have to refrigerate it. It was in like a plastic, like a coffee creamer bottle, like the I can't remember what the name is, but like those plastic, like they look like eggs almost.
Oh
Like,
yeah, yeah,
like
yeah.
bowling
I know
pins.
exactly what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah, so Loblaws PC brand had this eggnog that didn't require refrigeration, and I looked at it and I picked it up and it says expired, like this is in the mid 2000s, so it'd be like expires May as I'm buying it in November, and I'm like, oh sweet, I can buy
Oh
a
my
few of these and
God.
have some in May, which I did, and it was not good. Now, but I can't remember if I put it in the fridge, like the moment I got it. I'm like, I'm going to leave this into the fridge till May, which might have been the reason. But back to my original story, the reason why I brought up eggnog is tonight, Danielle and I were making dinner and we had omelets, and I'm like, oh, I love omelets. And sometimes to make them fluffy, like as you're whipping your eggs together, you can put some water in it or you can put some milk in it. I definitely poured eggnog into my egg mix and fluffed
Oh
that
my
up and cooked it. It
God.
was
You're a
fucking
maniac.
delicious. Danielle just looks at me and goes, you're fucking disgusting. And I'm sitting there eating it. I'm like, oh my God, this is so good. I want this tomorrow night. And now I'm sitting there thinking, I need to like, I was just like, I should open up a restaurant and sell eggnog omelets. That was my thought
I
process
went
right away.
to I was in a Farm Boy one summer. It wasn't even the summer, I think it was the spring, but I think they had just started to sell plants. And I went there with my partner to get some plants. And we were in, it was like, well, we're already at Farm Boy. Let's just run in and get a couple quick groceries and save ourselves from making a second trip. And I went through like the dairy section, and there it was in the dairy section. And I looked at it, and it was like buy 4 1-liter cartons of eggnog for $1. And I looked at the expiry date, and it was like,
Oh,
it wasn't even days away, it was hours away. Like we were right on the knife's edge. And I just remember
oh,
thinking, like, this is insane. And then I remember as we were leaving, I just saw somebody with 4 cartons of eggnog in their cart, and I'm like, it's going to go bad it's going to go bad tomorrow morning.
well, to be fair, the the best before is telling you like you can still drink it. It's just not as good. The flavor might be gone. Like Danielle makes a
Mhm.
fucking amazing eggnog cookies, and I'd be like, buy the eggnog. Let's go home and make some
I
eggnog
get,
cookies.
I get
Oh my
that.
god.
I do. But my problem is, say you buy a peach out of season and you go, oh, look, peaches are on sale. And you buy the peaches for cheap and you bring them home and you have a bite. And you're like, you know what? This one, it's not very ripe. It's not very juicy. There's not a lot of flavor. That's it. That is the downside to buying peaches out of season. The downside to buying and consuming eggnog out of season is it's expired egg and dairy, which is like the perfect formula for diarrhea. So it's like that's what you're risking. Like you want to risk a day long. I can't be more than 5 minutes. I can't be more than like a room away from a toilet just because eggnog was on sale. Like I can wait. I can wait. I can wait 1 full calendar year until eggnog is now fresh again before risking that.
I'd risk it.
Oh my God.